The church bell rang for her hanging at noon. A Lakota chief silenced it with one shot. The rifle was still warm when I set it across my knees. Not from the shot, from the sun. It had been lying in the scabbard all morning, and the leather held heat the way the ground holds it after summer, long after everything else has cooled. I remember that. The warmth of the wood against my palm and the way the smell of gun oil and horse sweat and dry August grass all came together at once. I remember looking down at the town from that ridge, maybe 400 yards, maybe a little more, and thinking that it looked from up there like a drawing someone had made of a town rather than a real one. Too neat, too certain of itself. The bell was still ringing. I'd hit the rope on the first shot. Hit it clean between the clapper and the mount, the way you'd cut a thread with a knife, one motion, no second thought. The bell lurched sideways and went silent mid-toll, and the silence after it was so sudden and so complete that I heard horses stomping all the way down in the street. I want to tell you something about silence like that. When a bell has been ringing for a long time, and it had been ringing since before I crested the ridge, I could hear it across the flat country coming in, low and steady and certain, like it was announcing something that couldn't be stopped. When a bell like that goes silent all at once, it doesn't feel like quiet. It feels like something has been cut. Like a rope under tension, suddenly parted. The air changes. I sat there on the ridge, and I listened to that changed air. Then I put the rifle back in the scabbard, turned the horse east, and rode down. My name is not one most white men could say right. In the language of my father's people, it means something like the man who stands while the river moves. My father gave it to me when I was 7 years old, after I stood still in the little Bighorn shallows while a flash flood came through. Not because I was brave, he said, but because I was stubborn. He meant it as a gentle insult. He was always doing that, calling a fault of mine by a better name than it deserved. He died when I was 14, of a sickness the agency doctor could have treated if he'd had the medicine, which he didn't because the shipment was late, which it always was. The people I traded with in towns called me Cole. That was close enough to a word in my father's language, a short clipped sound he used to make when he was approving of something. I didn't mind it. Cole was what I answered to on the trail. I was 53 years old that August. I had been a chief, not a war chief, though I'd been that too when I was younger, but a peace chief, which is a harder thing and not a proud title when your people are being pressed onto a strip of land that shrinks every time a new governor decides he needs to look useful. I had done the talking with the agencies. I had done the waiting in offices. I had held men back from fights that would have killed them and gained nothing, and some of those men had hated me for it, and some of them were dead anyway. There was a young man, a cousin of mine named Runs Before Horses, who told me once that I had traded the people's pride for a government blanket. He wasn't wrong. He just wasn't all the way right either. I had not taken a wife. I will say that plainly because it matters for what comes next. There had been a woman, years before, a woman of the Cheyenne, her name translated roughly as she who counts stars, and she had died in her second winter with me. The child too. After that I did not look. Not because I had decided not to, but because there was always something more pressing and the years had a way of stacking up. I was 53, and I slept on the ground in all weather and my knees ached when I stood too fast, and I had not held a woman in longer than I cared to calculate. I tell you this so you understand what I was, riding down off that ridge into Calverton, Wyoming in the last week of August, 1887. I was a man alone. I had been alone so long that alone had become the shape of me, the way water takes the shape of whatever holds it. I had come to Calverton for flour and salt and a new axle pin for the supply wagon that served 3 families wintering near the ridge. That was the whole of it. I had a list written on a piece of paper in my vest pocket in my own hand: flour, salt, axle pin, possibly lamp oil if the price was fair. I had been to Calverton twice before. It was not a friendly town, but it was not the worst I dealt with. The man who ran the hardware kept honest weights. The woman at the dry goods counter sometimes added a small bag of hard candy to a purchase without charging for it, which I never mentioned, and neither did she. I heard the bell when I was still 3 miles out crossing the flat, and I knew what a bell at noon on a Wednesday meant in a frontier town. It wasn't a church service. Wednesday noon wasn't that. A bell at noon on a weekday was an event, an execution usually, or a hanging. They liked the noon timing, something about the sun being high, the day being certain. The way they did things in those years, there was a ceremony to their cruelty. I could have turned north and come around and gone to the hardware store from the back road. I need to be honest with you about why I didn't. It wasn't heroism. I wasn't riding down to be any kind of hero. I don't think I knew what I was going to do until I did it. What happened was simpler and stranger than heroism. What happened was that I came up on the ridge and I looked down and I saw the gallows platform they'd built in the street, raw pine, still white, put up that morning from the look of it, and I saw the crowd gathered, maybe 80 people, maybe 100, and I saw her. She was small. That was the first thing. Small and straight-backed, standing on the platform in a dress that had been white once and was now the color of dust. Her hands were bound in front of her. Her hair was black, very black, and it was loose around her shoulders. Someone had either not bothered to tie it back or had taken out whatever had been holding it. I didn't know which yet. She was standing with her chin up. Not defiant, exactly. More like she had made a decision about how she was going to do this one thing, and she was doing it. I could see, even from 400 yards, that she was half-blood. I don't mean I could see her features exactly. I mean I could see the way the crowd was arranged around her. The particular distance people keep from something they have decided is not quite human. I knew that distance. I had stood inside it my whole life. The bell was ringing. I didn't make a speech to myself. I didn't weigh it. I took out the rifle, the long one, the Sharps, which I carried for distance work and had never once in 15 years failed me, and I laid it across the saddle, and I found the rope that connected the bell's clapper to the pull cord, and I shot it. Then I put the rifle away and rode down. What happened in the street when I came down off the ridge, I can tell you clearly because I have thought about it many times since, turned it over the way you turn a stone to see what's beneath it. The crowd had gone still when the bell stopped. Then there was shouting. Then some of it was directed up toward the ridge. I could see men pointing. And by the time I rode in at the far end of the street, the mood had arranged itself into something between fury and the particular rigid caution that comes over people when they're not sure what they're dealing with. A man stepped out in front of me. Big man, red in the face, with a town marshal's badge that looked like it had been pinned on recently and with some enthusiasm. He held up a hand. "You'll stop there," he said. I stopped. "Who in the hell are you, and what is the meaning of that shot?" My horse was moving under me, not nervous exactly, just alive, feeling the crowd. I kept my hands where the marshal could see them and I said, "I heard a bell. I stopped it." Is there a law against that? There's a law against interfering with a lawful execution. Is there a law against stopping a bell? You shot a rope in the church tower, you damn. He stopped himself. He looked at me more carefully. He looked at the horse, which was a good horse, and showed it, and he looked at the rifle in the scabbard, and he looked at my face. He was doing math. I let him do it. "Who are you?" he said again, but quieter this time. "Cole," I said. "I came for flour and salt in a hardware piece." "You're Lakota." My father was. My mother was half French and half Crow, so I am approximately a collection of arguments. I said it flat, not as a joke, just as a fact. The marshal's face did something complicated. I have business in this town. I didn't come for trouble. I came for supplies. Someone in the crowd shouted something I won't repeat. I looked in the direction of the shout, not at any particular person, just in that direction, long enough. The shouting stopped. "The woman," I said to the marshal, "what is the charge?" He drew himself up. "Witchcraft." I heard that word and I heard everything underneath it. In 1887, when a frontier town charged a woman with witchcraft, what they were charging her with was existing in a way that frightened them. Being a healer when their doctor had failed. Being alone when a woman wasn't supposed to be alone. Being something they couldn't place and therefore couldn't trust. Witchcraft, I said. She killed a man, John Pruitt, a farmer north of here. Used herbs and devil's medicine and killed him. What medicine? What? What herb? What did she give him? The marshal stared at me. How in the damn it's not your concern what herb? John Pruitt, I said. North of here. How long was he sick before she treated him? Something moved in the crowd. I couldn't see her from here. The platform was behind the crowd and I was on horseback. But I thought I saw a movement up there, a small shift in the row of heads. 2 weeks, a woman in the crowd said. I looked over. She was middle-aged, wearing an apron, her arms crossed. She looked like someone who had thought about this. He was sick 2 weeks before Margaret went to him. Margaret, I said, just saying it, getting the name. She's a half-blood, the marshal said, and by the way he said it, he seemed to think that was the most relevant thing. Her father was a trapper and her mother was Apache, the woman in the apron said. Her mother was Apache. Margaret was raised here. She's lived in this county 12 years. And John Pruitt, I said to the apron woman, what did he have? The croup fever, the bad kind, the kind that took the Henley boy in June. I turned back to the marshal. A man sick 2 weeks with croup fever in August dies, I said. That's not witchcraft. That's a man sick 2 weeks too long. What she gave him probably slowed the dying. Maybe it would have saved him if they'd called her sooner. I said it without heat because heat wouldn't help, just flat like arithmetic. The marshal's jaw was tight. Son, I don't know who you think you are, riding in here and... I don't think I'm anyone, I said. I'm a man who came for flour. I'm telling you what I know about croup fever and what grows in this territory. The Apache woman who raised Margaret probably knew every herb between the Sierra Madre and the Powder River. Whatever Margaret gave John Pruitt was medicine. He died because he was sick too long. Charge her with that if you need to charge her with something. It was quiet in the street for a moment. Then the marshal said, she's been judged. The judge came through 3 days ago and the trial was. Where's the judge now? Rode on to Billings on Thursday. So the man who judged her is gone and you're left to hang her. I let that sit. That's convenient. The red in his face had spread. He put his hand near his hip, not on the gun, just near it. I didn't move. I looked at him the way my father taught me to look at something dangerous, steady, not fixed, present, not afraid. My father said that fear and attention look the same from the outside, and only you can tell the difference, and the difference doesn't matter as much as people think. I'm not here to fight your town, I said. I'm here for flour and salt. But if you hang that woman for croup fever and Apache medicine, you'll hang an innocent woman. And innocent blood is a weight. Towns carry it a long time. I don't know why that landed. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was something in my face. Maybe the woman in the apron had been thinking the same thing for 3 days and was glad someone said it out loud. Whatever the reason, the marshal's hand moved away from his hip. He looked at the ground. He looked at the crowd. Untie her, said the woman in the apron, and she said it like she was the one with authority, and she walked toward the platform. I did not watch them untie her. I rode to the far end of the street and I got down and I tied my horse and I went into the hardware store and I stood at the counter and I bought an axle pin. My hands were steady. I remember being mildly surprised by that. The hardware man, his name was Bestir Heavyset, always smelled of metal, looked at me across the counter and said, "Hell of a shot." "Fair range," I said. "Better than fair." He wrapped the axle pin in brown paper. "You here for anything else?" "Flour, salt, maybe lamp oil." "Dry goods is next door." He paused. "You want some advice?" "Probably not." Don't be in town when Vic Pruitt hears about this. John's brother. He's got 3 boys and they're all. He made a gesture that meant large and stupid and angry. I'll be gone before dark, I said. I took the axle pin and I went next door for the flour and the salt and the lamp oil, which turned out to be fairly priced, and I came back out to the street, and the sun was past noon now, the shadows beginning to tilt east, and the crowd had broken up mostly, people drifting back to whatever the day had been before, the way water levels out after you've thrown something in it. She was sitting on the edge of the boardwalk in front of the mercantile, alone. Her hands were free, the rope gone, and she was sitting very still with her hands in her lap, looking at nothing particular. I stopped. I didn't mean to. I was on my way to the horse, but I stopped. She looked up. Her face was, I will tell you what I noticed in the order I noticed it. The Apache in her was clear, the line of her jaw and her cheekbones, the very black hair. She was younger than I'd expected from up on the ridge. 30, maybe a little older. There was a bruise on her left cheekbone, 3 or 4 days old, yellowing at the edge. Her eyes were dark and very direct. Not grateful, not frightened, just looking at me. You shot the bell, she said. The rope, I said. That's a fine distinction. I'm a fine distinction kind of man. Something moved in her face, not quite a smile, the shape a smile leaves behind after it's been there. Thank you, she said, and she said it the way you say it when you mean the thing without dressing it up. Where are you going? I said. She looked away down the street. I had a house, north of town, about a mile. They'll let you go back to it. I don't know, she said it plainly. Probably not. John Pruitt's brother is. She stopped, looked at her hands. I know what the hardware man told you. I saw you come out. Bistur talks, I said. Bistur's not wrong. She stood up. She was small, but she stood up straight, same as she'd stood on the platform. There was a quality in her that I recognized without knowing right away what I was recognizing. Later, I figured it out. It was the same thing I'd always done, staying on your feet in circumstances that invited you to go down. Not strength exactly, more like the refusal to find a position of submission comfortable. Where are you going? She said back to me, turning it around. East, I said, back toward the ridge. 3 families camped there. I'm bringing supplies. She was quiet a moment. Then, I know plants, Apache plants, Cheyenne plants, things that grow between here and the Powder River, which your people know too. She looked at me. If you have 3 families camped, you might need someone who knows medicine. I should tell you what I felt right then. I should tell you plainly because it matters more than any of the dramatic parts, more than the shot, more than the street confrontation. What I felt was something shifting. The way ice shifts in a river in the first week of spring, you're not sure you heard it, but something moved. The Pruitt boys will come tonight, I said. Probably. You understand that if you ride with me, they'll follow east. I'm not afraid of east. I looked at her. She looked at me. Neither of us was performing anything. We were just 2 people standing in a street in Wyoming working out a thing that mattered. My horse carries 2, I said. I have a horse, she said. They took her to the stable. I need to get her. I'll come with you to the stable. She nodded once. And that was the beginning of it. We rode east in the late afternoon with the sun behind us throwing our shadows long and thin on the dry grass ahead. She rode well. The Apache way, not the Eastern way, the English riding school way, but the way that comes from learning on horseback before you learn to walk all that surely. Low, part of the horse, easy with turns. We didn't talk for the first mile. I'd found that most people fill silence because they're afraid of it, and most people worth knowing don't do that. She didn't do that. She rode and she looked at the country and she was quiet, and the quiet between us was comfortable in a way I hadn't felt with another person in a very long time. It was the quiet of 2 people who are each used to their own company, and are therefore not threatened by someone else's. Somewhere around the 2nd mile she said, "What do your people call you?" I told her the full name, and what it meant. She was quiet a moment. "That's a good name," she said. "My mother gave me a name in Apache, but I gave it up years ago. It was easier not to carry it where people couldn't say it." She said it without bitterness, just stating the cost. "They called me Margaret here." "What was the Apache name?" She told me, and I won't write it here because it wasn't mine to write down, but I can tell you I said it back correctly, or close enough that she turned and looked at me. "You know some Apache," she said. "Some, enough to buy horses and apologize. The important things." That got the smile, the real one this time. We reached the camp at dusk. 3 families, the Strongbow family and 2 Lakota families named Walks Distant and Red Bird, 8 adults and 9 children between them, camped in a draw below the ridge where the wind broke and a spring ran cold and clean from the rock. They'd been there 3 weeks and would stay until the weather turned and then move south. Martha Strongbow, she was around 60, the oldest, the one the others deferred to, saw us ride in and looked at Margaret with the particular measuring look of a woman who is deciding something. She looked at me too. Then she went back to her fire without saying anything, which was her way of saying it was all right. I unpacked the flour and the salt and showed Red Bird's eldest boy how to replace the axle pin. While I was doing that, I heard Margaret's voice from near the Strongbow fire, asking Martha something, and I heard Martha's voice answering, short at first, then longer. By the time I'd washed up at the spring, they were sitting together, and Margaret was looking at something Martha had shown her, a plant, dried, bundled, and they were talking in a way that had moved past introduction into something more like conversation between equals. I stood at the spring and I watched that. I didn't try to name what I felt, I just felt it. The Pruitt boys came at 2 in the morning. I wasn't asleep. I haven't slept deeply in years, something that happens when you've spent enough time in circumstances where sleeping deeply could end you. I was lying on my bedroll near the fire, and I heard the horses before they were within 100 yards, the particular uneven sound of men riding fast and not trying to be quiet about it because they'd decided certainty was better than stealth. I was on my feet before the sound was fully formed in my head, old habit. There were 4 of them, not 3 like Besteur had said. Vic Pruitt and 3 of his boys, all large the way Besteur had indicated, all carrying that brand of grievance that had soured into something uglier than grief. They came into the firelight hard and loud, horses blowing and stamping. Vic Pruitt was maybe 50. A man made of old anger. You could see it in the set of his face, in the way he held himself, like the anger had been there so long it had become structural, the way water hollows stone. "Where is she?" he said. I was standing between the fire and the camp. "She's sleeping," I said. "She killed my brother." "Your brother died of croup fever." I said it quietly enough that he'd have to quiet himself to hear it. "He was sick 2 weeks. He was going to die. Margaret tried to save him." "That Apache witch." "She's not a witch, she's a healer, there's a difference." I paused, "and she's under my protection." Vic Pruitt looked at me for a long moment. His sons looked at him, then at me. One of them, the youngest, maybe 17, was looking at the horses rather than at me, which told me he wasn't sure he was supposed to be here. That one I didn't worry about. "You got a hell of a lot of gall," Vic said, "coming into this territory and telling us." "I've been in this territory since before your father was born," I said, "and I'm telling you your brother died of a fever, which is a hard thing and I'm sorry for it, but it wasn't Margaret's doing, and whatever you're planning to do here tonight, you should think very carefully about whether you want to do it." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't reach for anything. I just stood. The youngest son, the one watching the horses, said, "Pa," quietly, just that. Vic looked at me a long time. I looked back the same way I'd looked at the marshal that afternoon, steady and present, not challenging, not backing, just there. Behind me I heard someone moving. I didn't turn. I knew by the sound, light-footed, careful, that it was Margaret. She'd woken. She came and stood beside me, slightly behind my shoulder, and I felt rather than saw her presence the way you feel warmth from a fire to your side. Vic Pruitt looked at her. Something moved in his face. Grief maybe underneath everything else. Real grief, the raw kind that the anger had been covering over. "He was my brother," he said. "I know," Margaret said. Her voice was quiet. "I tried, I want you to know that. I got there too late, but I tried." Vic sat on his horse for another long moment. One of his older sons shifted, restless, the horse moving under him. The youngest was still watching the horses. Then Vic Pruitt pulled his horse's head around and rode back the way he'd come. The boys looked at each other. Then they followed. I listened until the sound of the horses was gone. Then I stood there in the quiet. Margaret had not moved from beside me. I could feel her standing there. I could hear her breathing slow down from the particular controlled evenness of someone who is managing fear into something quieter. "That could have gone another way," she said. "Yes," I said. "You didn't move." "No." She was quiet. Then why not? I thought about how to say it, and decided the true thing was simpler than whatever dressed-up answer I might have put in front of it. "Because I was where I needed to be," I said. She was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. After that the camp went back to sleep, or tried to. I stayed by the fire. Around 4 in the morning Margaret came and sat across from me, wrapped in a blanket, and we talked. I don't remember all of it, the particular words, the exact order, but I remember the character of it, the way some conversations have a character, a tone that's theirs and no one else's. It was direct. It had no performance in it. We were two people who had both lived long enough to be tired of the performance version of things, and were talking to each other the way people talk, when they've decided that the truth is easier than the alternative. She told me about her mother. About learning plants in childhood, not as school, just as walking in the desert and her mother saying the names and the uses. About her father, the trapper, who had been a decent man in his way and who had died when she was 9 and left her in a country that didn't know what to do with her. About 12 years in Calverton, learning to fit into the edges of the place, becoming useful, becoming the woman people called when the doctor had failed and they were afraid. I told her about my father, about the agency years, the watching things shrink, about the peace chief years and what they had cost and what they hadn't been able to save, about she who counts stars briefly because she asked and it seemed dishonest not to answer, about the long alone years that weren't miserable exactly, just thin, a life that had been stripped down to function. She listened the way good listeners do, not waiting for her turn, actually inside it. At some point the fire had gone low and the sky was beginning to pale in the east, that first gray-pink that isn't quite color yet, and she said, "Where are you going after this? After you leave the families here?" "South," I said. "Eventually I follow the work." She looked at the fire. "I don't have anywhere to go back to," she said. "They won't let me back in that house. Probably burned it already." "Probably," I said. I didn't dress it up for her. She wasn't the kind to want it dressed. She looked at me. The firelight was doing something to her face, the color of it, the planes of it. I looked back. "I know plants south of here," she said. "Down to the territory. Apache plants and Comanche plants and things between." "That's useful," I said. "I know you know it's useful." I did. I also knew it wasn't why I wanted her to come. But I didn't say the other thing yet. It was too early and I wasn't sure I had the right to say it. What I was sure of was that I was sitting by a fire at 4 in the morning in Wyoming with a woman I had met yesterday and felt, for the first time in years, that the space around me was the right size. We stayed at the camp 4 more days. In those 4 days I watched Margaret move through the camp the way water moves through a place it belongs to, finding the level, not forcing anything. Martha Strongbow warmed to her by the end of the 2nd day. The children warmed to her faster, the way children always do when someone is genuinely interested in them rather than managing them. She was interested in things. Plants, birds, the way the rock formation on the east side of the draw held water in a crack no one had noticed. She showed Red Bird's youngest boy how to press a poultice for a cut on his hand that had been seeping, and it healed clean. She was not trying to be useful. She just was. I watched this. I did my own work, repairs to the camp, helping reinforce the wagon the families would move with when winter came, checking the horses. And I watched her from the corners of my work, the way you watch something that you've begun to believe is real but aren't quite ready to stake the whole of your attention on. On the third evening, Martha Strongbow said to me in Lakota, while Margaret was out of earshot, "That woman is good." "I know," I said. Martha looked at me with the look she'd been using on me since I was young, which was the look of a person who knows what you're avoiding and has decided to wait you out. She said nothing else. She didn't need to. On the fourth night, I was sitting on the east side of the draw where the rock held a little of the day's heat, and Margaret came and sat beside me. Not across from me, the way we'd sat at the fire those first nights. Beside me, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. We looked at the stars for a while. It was a good night for stars, no moon yet, the sky very deep, the kind of dark that happens after you've been away from towns and lamplight for a few days, and your eyes have remembered what the sky actually is. "Martha told me something," Margaret said. "What?" "She said you haven't had a home in a long time." She said it without softness, just stating the thing. She said that you've been without a home. "Martha is honest," I said. "Is she right?" I thought about how to answer that. The accurate answer was yes, and the accurate answer was also that I hadn't thought of it in those terms, home, because thinking about it in those terms would have made the lacking more concrete than I preferred. I said, "I've had a place to sleep." "That's not the same thing." "No," I said, "it's not." She was quiet. Then she turned and looked at me, and in the dark I could see her eyes, the reflection of the stars in them, and she said, "I'm not going back to Calverton." "I know. And I'm not asking for anything," she said. "I want you to know that. I'm not asking for protection or a keeper or—" "Margaret," I said. She stopped. "I know," I said. "I know you're not." She looked at me, I looked at her. This was the moment, I knew it and she knew it, when we were deciding something without the words being said yet. The kind of deciding that happens before language catches up. I reached out and I put my hand over hers. Her hands were in her lap and I put my hand over them, covering them. Not a large gesture, not dramatic, just, "I'm here and I mean to stay here, and that means something." She turned her hand under mine and held on. Her grip was firm, not tentative. She held my hand the way she'd stood on that platform, certain of the decision, letting it show. We sat like that for a long time, looking at the stars. After a while she said, very quietly, "Good." Just that one word. But the way she said it, the shape of that word, the way the whole weight of the days before it was in it, I felt it go through me from the top of my head to the soles of my feet. We left the camp the next morning. Martha Strongbow was up before dawn, and she handed Margaret a bundle of dried medicine, wrapped carefully. Things she'd traded me for over the years, Strongbow medicines, Lakota medicines, things that were hard to find south of the Powder River. Margaret held them against her chest and said something to Martha in Lakota that I hadn't known she knew, and Martha made the sound that passed for her laugh, the short clipped sound, and reached out and briefly touched Margaret's face. That was all, but it was a great deal. I loaded the horses. The walk's distant family sent us with a bag of dried meat and a small carved figure that the eldest girl had made and wanted Margaret to have, a small horse out of cottonwood, the lines rough and good. Margaret put it in her saddlebag with care. The Strongbow boy who'd had the cut hand stood at the edge of camp and watched us go. I raised a hand to him. He raised one back. We rode south into the early light, the country opening up ahead of us, the grass silver with dew, the sky that particular pale that comes just before the full blue of morning. The ridge was behind us. The Prewitt boys were behind us. Calverton and its bell and its pinewood gallows were behind us. She rode beside me, not behind, beside. The sun came up over the eastern plain and hit us full in the face, warm and flat and the color of good copper, and she tilted her head back just slightly into it, eyes closed for a moment, just feeling the warmth. Something in my chest did a thing I couldn't name and didn't try to. I want to tell you one more thing before I'm done with this story. About 2 hours south of the camp, the country gets wide. It opens up, the hills flatten out, and there's maybe 20 miles of grass in every direction. And on a clear morning, you can see the shadows of clouds moving on the plain from 10 miles off, these great slow-moving shapes crossing the gold-green grass. It's the most open I know, that stretch of country. You are very small in it. We were in the middle of that open stretch when Margaret said, "Tell me the name again." "Which name?" "Yours, the real one." I told her, slowly, each syllable. She said it back. She said it right, not perfect, but close, the intention there, the shape of the sounds faithful to the original. Like she'd been holding it in her mouth since I'd said it, practicing the feel of it. "The man who stands while the river moves," she said. "That's it." She was quiet for a moment, writing. Then, "That's what you did," she said. "In that street you stood." "The river was small that day," I said. "It wasn't small." She turned and looked at me from horseback, the sun behind her now, her face lit from the front, dark eyes very clear. "It wasn't small, and you stood anyway." She held my gaze the way she'd held my hand the night before, the same quality in it, certain, no performance. "I see you," she said. "I want you to know that. I see what you are." I looked at her. I held the look. There are moments in a man's life that he carries forever. Not always the ones you expect. Not the great battles or the great losses. Sometimes it's a moment in the middle of open country in the early morning, a woman beside him on horseback, the sun full on her face, saying, "I see what you are." I had been a chief. I had been a peacekeeper and a trader and a man between worlds, valued by neither, belonging to both and to neither, doing the work and asking nothing for it. I had been alone 53 years. I had been called a name that meant stubbornness dressed as virtue, and I had worn it like a coat I hadn't chosen. She saw me, not what I'd been, not the title, not the use I was to anyone. Me, the actual man, standing in the open country of his own life. I don't have a word for what that was. The Lakota have a word that is sometimes translated as return, but that doesn't cover it. It's more like the word for water coming back to its level after something has disturbed it, coming back to itself. That was what it felt like. We rode on south through the long grass, side by side, the country opening up around us. The little cottonwood horse rode in her saddlebag. Martha's medicines rode wrapped in her pack. The sun climbed and the shadows shortened, and the world was just what it was, wide and clean and ours. I had been alone a long time. I wasn't anymore.